As AI technologies continue to evolve and proliferate, the demand for data center capacity is skyrocketing, leading to a global boom in data center construction and investment.
Everything that we do digitally across the world at the back end, silently working to make sure things happen, is the whole infrastructure of data centers. The Americas, which is by far the largest data center market, both in terms of demand and supply, even that is growing 2.5 times. So yes, Asia Pacific is growing 2 times, but the biggest markets in the world are growing faster than Asia Pacific. India, all cities in India were either emerging or minor markets, and our forecast suggests that at least in Asia Pacific, in about 10 years' time, Mumbai could be the top market, if not in the top 3 markets. Having access to more power in the future will definitely be a very critical element for investing and developing data centers. Data center firms that operate in India have got into some kind of a collaboration to make sure that they are directly able to source power from green power generators.
Hello and welcome to The Interface, the Hindus podcast to make sense of the accelerating pace of change underpinned by technology. I'm your host, John Xavier, the Hindus technology editor. Today's episode is powered by AMD EPYC processors. Artificial intelligence has sparked an insatiable appetite for computing power and data storage, driving rapid expansion of data centers, the physical backbone of the digital world. At the forefront of this expansion are hyperscalers, that is, data centers of tech giants like Google, Amazon, and Microsoft. They are massive scalable data center infrastructures, power cloud services, and AI applications that are becoming increasingly integral to business operations and daily life. As AI technologies continue to evolve and proliferate, the demand for data center capacity is skyrocketing, leading to a global boom in data center construction and investment. These modern data fortresses are growing not just in numbers but in scale, with some facilities now consuming as much electricity as a small city. This growth, while enabling remarkable technological progress, also brings significant challenges. From the pressing need for sustainable energy solutions to the constant drive for greater efficiency and innovation, the intersection of AI, hyperscalers, and data centers represent a critical frontier in technology infrastructure, one that will play a pivotal role in shaping our digital future. Joining me to explore this physical backbone of the digital world is Vivek Dahiya, Managing Director and Head of Data Center Advisory Team for Asia Pacific at Cushman & Wakefield. Vivek, welcome to the show. Appreciate you joining me for this discussion.
Thank you, John. It's a pleasure to speak with you today.
Vivek, maybe we could kick off this discussion starting from the basics on maybe you could just give a brief bit about what you do at Cushman and Wakefield and also then broaden it into the area of data centers and what exactly happens inside.
Yeah, sure. So quick 101 on data centers. First, about our team, we are group specialists who work in the data center space in Cushman & Wakefield. I lead the team across Asia Pacific. That is 14 markets across the region, right from North Asia to Australia, Southeast Asia, India, and Greater China. We work with our clients, hyperscalers, operators, developer investors who are looking at the data center space, helping them throughout the life cycle of the data center asset class, which is research, consulting, valuations, all sorts of transactions, including capital markets. We are building data centers. We are project managers for about 1.4 gigawatt of data center projects coming up in the region. And of course, once the project is ready, we even maintain the data centers. We help lease the data centers. So everything in the asset class. So that's about us. And quickly, a bit about data centers per se. This particular digital infrastructure / asset class came into focus a lot post-COVID, post-2020, when the digital transformation across the world was expedited due to various circumstances that we are all aware of. Firms who were shy of moving to the cloud had to move really quickly so that they could continue working. Many firms ended up deriving many benefits from working in the cloud, and so they continued to grow there. And what we've seen since then is continuous adoption. So something like video call or a conference call or a Zoom call or a Teams call, which was pretty much unheard of 5, 7 years ago, is now the norm across the world. And everything that we do digitally across the world at the back end, silently working to make sure things happen, is the whole infrastructure of data centers. As I mentioned, this is digital infrastructure as much as it is real estate in some shape or form. And that's critical for all the economies to keep growing, keep digitally transforming, and keep making sure that they're able to, each economy or each company or each individual is able to make the maximum out of the digital infrastructure that is coming up, is available to all of us now.
Right. So you mentioned about COVID and how things have changed. So from your experience, do you see that there's been a significant shift from the point of, let's say, the overall trend on AI with ChatGPT and its ilk, and pre that time? How do you see this divergence in AI creating a change in the data center world?
So AI really caught everyone's imagination sometime late last year due to the astounding success of ChatGPT, which gave confidence to other LLM creators that if they bring out a good product in the market, if they offer a good service, there would be sufficient takers for it. And that simply added a new layer of demand to how data centers are growing across the world. So let's say before, and let's just go slightly beyond, slightly before even COVID. Historically, most of the data centers were being used for storage, for processing, for transmitting data, pretty much very basic stuff. But then a few years ago, we had the whole technology of cloud, which all of us use knowingly or unknowingly. And the cloud services or cloud software and the cloud business ended up adding a new demand to data centers that was pretty much unheard of historically. So one can say that even before the AI era began, there was significant demand from cloud service firms across the world. And not only did they increase the amount of data center space that they were acquiring or leasing, it also increased the pace at which they needed that space. So both the quantum of demand and the speed of demand was already fairly healthy and strong before late last year. Everyone was gobsmacked by 100 million subscribers for ChatGPT in 2 months. And that has only added an additional demand for provision of data center services, because eventually, as we say, that even the cloud requires a building. Similarly, the AI models would be run in a data center, which will be hosted in a building. So that demand continues. So an already fairly active market saw an injection of even further growth late last year. From a demand perspective, it's all positive for everyone.
Right. And I like to refer to your global data center market comparison report from Cushman and Wakefield on how you kind of categorize three large areas: Americas, EMEA, and APAC. And in the report says that America is growing 2.5x, and APAC is fast catching up at 2.2x, while EMEA is at 2x. So how does these markets look, and what's the dynamic like? What are things changing in it? Could you give like a snapshot about these markets and then dive into APAC?
Yeah, and I'm glad you raised that, because not many of us were aware of what was happening across the world. Uh, while someone like me who's doing 24/7 just data centers, we probably were more in tune with it. But generally speaking, many people felt that just because parts of Asia Pacific and let's say India do not have such high quantum of digital infrastructure, we are only probably playing catch up. And once we've done the catch up bit, then the whole demand will plateau and this will eventually run out of steam. When we started looking at what's happening across the world, several observations came out. One was very pleasantly for us, we realized that the Asia Pacific region where we are based is actually much bigger than the EMEA region. One would assume that the Europe, Middle East, and Africa will add up being much bigger market than Asia Pacific. But as the things stand right now, Asia Pacific is much larger. The other thing that we noticed was the Americas, which is by far the largest data center market, both in terms of demand and supply. Even that is growing 2.5 times. So yes, Asia Pacific is growing 2.2 times, but the biggest markets in the world are growing faster than Asia Pacific. So it's not something about just catching up, which definitely most markets in Asia Pacific are doing, but it's also the sheer nature with which the world has evolved so quickly, first because of cloud, now then because of AI, that the largest markets in the world, which is let's say North Virginia or parts of the Americas, they are growing, if not as fast, if not faster than as fast as parts of Asia Pacific. So that was a very heartening thing to see, because we felt that is this something happening only to our region? And in hindsight, we realized no. And research for us shows that this is everything happening everywhere all at once, as we love saying very often.
That's interesting. And do you see this trend extending, given that this is a sort of thing that, of course, is something that you've been tracking, but is this also going to lead to a phase where this will move a little more into more emerging markets over the years? The simple reason I raise this question is data centers are physical assets that are going to sit on physical land, so which means the cost of running one is going to increase. So in terms of achieving economies of scale, hyperscalers like Google, Microsoft, and AWS would pick regions that give them a good cost differential. So will that have an effect on how these market dynamics play out in future?
Actually, all good points, John, because and I think all of them are relevant. So let's talk about emerging markets first that you referred to. Yes, the emerging markets are beginning to see far more investments than we've ever seen historically in the data center space. I would say that India, all cities in India were either emerging or minor markets, and our forecast suggests that at least in Asia Pacific, in about 10 years' time, Mumbai could be the top market, if not in the top three markets. So it is possible that because of the investments happening across these emerging markets, that some of them actually could become very mature, established, and one of the largest markets in the world. Very similar to, let's say, what Bangalore 25 years ago was there in commercial real estate, hardly figuring anywhere. And now Bangalore is one of the largest commercial real estate markets in the world. We feel that, and our data currently suggests that Mumbai would be one of the leaders when it comes to total data center supply and demand, let's say 5 to 10 years from now. So emerging markets will become established and potentially market leaders. Uh, and that's not just about Mumbai. There are other markets which were unheard of from a data center perspective, which have picked up extremely well. Johor, next to Singapore, because of moratorium in Singapore, has reaped the benefits of its proximity, low latencies, good infrastructure, and that is emerging also as a very established, strong market in times to come. Jakarta, because the sheer population and the data that they're consuming is emerging as a very large market as well. So you're very right about many established markets coming into their own, maturing, and becoming fairly established for this asset class.
Right. And also the other factor as the hyperscalers, which largely represents the overall data center clientele, if I may say so, is they are looking at newer markets in emerging region to kind of get a cost differential. The other interesting aspect from your report also highlights the importance of power availability. So, how do these hyperscalers or data center units look at the power availability, and how do they factor that into building their data centers?
And I'll talk about power and then I'll go to the cost differential. See, data and power, which is optic fiber connectivity, and power is like air and water to data centers. If you don't have fiber connectivity, if you don't have power, we can't run data centers. So power is extremely critical. So any country or region or city which has abundant power or is investing heavily in power generation and power distribution infrastructure stands to gain in the short and the long run for attracting data center investments. So there are countries which were not investing heavily in new power generation, which have been taken by a surprise by this demand, a pleasant surprise for them, and now will be have already started investing, will be investing more to make sure that they meet the demand. So there are certain countries in North Asia which were seeing a very minor GDP growth, if any, and they didn't really had any business case to invest in fresh power generation where the GDP is not growing that much. But almost every emerging economy or most emerging economies which with stronger GDPs like India or Indonesia were already investing heavily in power generation and green power generation. So yes, having access to more power in the future will definitely be a good, a very critical element for investing and developing data centers. And coming to the cost bit, now cost is important. Yes, for example, constructing data centers in India is cheaper than constructing it in Japan or Australia. But due to data sovereignty, every country prefers to have their own data stored in their own country. So even if it's expensive to build and buy land and build in Japan or Korea, because of the government laws, you will have to build data centers there as well. So data being so critical for every country, and they don't want to part away with it, while there are cost arbitrages being provided through countries like India and others, every country will have to have their own data center infrastructure to make sure that data remains in their own boundaries.
Right, yeah. And on that note, a word about AMD EPYC processors. They deliver exceptional performance for enterprises, cloud, and HPC workloads. This means data centers can handle massive data sets and complex workloads faster, which translates to quicker results for businesses of all sizes. Performance isn't the only story here. AMD EPYC processors are also incredibly energy efficient. AMD has a goal to deliver 30x increase in energy efficiency for their server processors by 2025. On top of that, AMD EPYC processors are built with security in mind. They include AMD Infinity Guard, a comprehensive set of features that help protect sensitive data from security breaches. So whether you're running a small business or a global enterprise, AMD EPYC processors offer power efficiency and security needed to unlock the full potential of your data center. And the other aspect in terms of building, so of course all countries need it, given glad you raised the sovereignty point. The other aspect that comes alongside the data center, data centers being set up, is most of it is going in places where it's already drought prone, particularly in India, like Mumbai, Delhi, Chennai. So some of these places are drought prone, and they are also at risk of severe flooding and heat. So, in that context, how do you feel that data center setup impacts climate change in specific countries and regions?
It's actually a very, very critical element. In fact, whenever we do site search and selection for data center firms, climate risk analysis is a critical element of that. Doing a 100-year flood history and other related factors are always covered in detail during the due diligence before a region or a city or a site is acquired. And the unknown element here is it's very difficult to predict how climate change will impact. So what has happened in the last 100 years could be slightly different from what might happen in the immediate or the near future. So yes, that's a risk which is very carefully examined by data center firms. It's on the top of the agenda to make sure that if you buy and build a data center in a particular location, you don't want those services to get disrupted because of these natural calamities. So that remains a very, very critical factor in site selection. Coming to your earlier question on the climate risk on the power bit, I think there is, sorry, the water question that you had. Most of the data center firms are cognizant of the needs that they have and the impact they have on their environment. And we are beginning to see more and more data center firms opt for air cooled chillers and not water cooled chillers. We are beginning to see more and more of them manage the temperatures within their premises so that it's easier to manage and they're not putting a strain on the environment. We are beginning to see adoption of new technologies where we have liquid cooling and chip level cooling, which further reduces the need for excessive cooling, which will reduce the load on chillers and which will reduce the use of water. So, thankfully, the industry is very well cognizant of the way the world is changing and the potential impact that they can have on their ecosystem. And they are very quick to adopt new technologies to make sure that what they're putting out in the market is as sustainable as possible.
Right. Yeah, sustainability is the key factor. Glad that you brought some of. Could you elaborate on what are some of the other areas that data center firms are focusing on in terms of green data center technologies on keeping, while their output is higher, they also reduce the power consumption and reduce the heat generated out of these centers?
Correct. So there are two, three parameters that we look at it to start off with before we go to the details. So there is usage effectiveness, which is PUE, and how efficient are they on that. There's water usage effectiveness. Are they recycling it and how effective are they? And there is carbon utilization as well. So what we notice there is that almost every data center firm, developer, investor we speak to has got their 2030, 2050 targets as the world expects every firm to follow. First step for everyone is to be carbon neutral. And second step for everyone is to make sure that they are net zero in terms of sustainability. And they are, I would say, most of the firms are making extensive efforts to solve the challenge from the beginning itself. So, finding out ways to draw power from renewable sources. Now, in certain parts of the world, nuclear power would be termed as renewable. It's not black power, it's called relatively green power. So, many of the new technologies are coming in which are going to be able to provide consistent power at good quality to data centers dedicatedly, so they're not relying on carbon driven power. We are seeing a lot of joint ventures and collaborations between data center firms and green power generators, whether it's solar farms or wind farms or equivalents. And there are almost all the Indian firms or the firms, data center firms that operate in India, have got into some kind of a collaboration to make sure that they are directly able to source power from green power generators. So sustainability is top of the agenda in almost all the conversations that we have with the clients. Our sustainability team actually works with many of them to help them both plan a strategy, then implement it, and eventually, if we have to help them get contracts or power purchase agreements signed with green power firms, hopefully facilitate that as well. So nobody is acting like an ostrich in the sand, digging their head in the sand. Everybody's very aware of the challenge and based on their strengths and challenges and limitations, trying to find a solution for themselves.
Right. And you did mention about Singapore's policy on the initial moratorium on building data centers, and which was lifted in 2022. Could you give a kind of a picture around Asia Pac, at least in terms of government policies and how it has actually changed the way data centers are being set up? Are there any best practices that governments have picked from different other countries in the region? Could you speak to that?
I would start off with India before I go to Singapore because India already has about 43% of power being generated, if my data is correct, through green sources, if we include nuclear and hydro in that. And some data told me that over 60% of the new power generation that's going to happen in India will be through green sources. So the policy decisions taken by our government and the investment we've been able to attract, Indian and international, in this space is actually a good benchmark for rest of the countries to follow, where majority of your future incoming power is going to be green, and there's abundant power for people to choose from. You're not struggling to get power. So I'd say one of the shining examples of green power is our Indian policies, and we are actually one of the rare countries in the world where green power is cheaper than black power, and that is not the case in most of the economies. So that's a rare good tick in the box that we have. But that said, Singapore did initiate the policy towards how to go about this in a more structured manner. So when they opened the moratorium last year, they asked every new incoming data center firm who was given, four firms were given 20 megawatt each, to ensure that their PUE, which I was referring to earlier, the power utilization, power usage effectiveness, is about 1.3. Now, to put it in perspective, 1.3 means that 0.3% of the power is being used for other elements besides running the actual servers inside the data center. So that zero point 0.3 has to come as down as possible. So in Scandinavian countries, it could be as low as 1.1 because the climate supports them. But in tropical nations like India and Singapore, it's difficult to even reach 1.3. But that was the category, like a first benchmark that Singapore set, which I feel other countries can follow, which will just incentivize data center firms to probably just expedite that process. And we don't have a similar policy of a guideline or a norm in India as of now. But I know that at certain states in China, there is this clarity towards making sure that there is green power coming for those data centers. It really hasn't caught the attention of many people because of the Chinese economy being going through a rough patch. So those not many people have been able to pick up best practices from there. But we can expect more such policies to come across the region where not only data centers are being attracted to that country or that city, but they are also incentivized or advised to be as sustainable, as green as possible.
That's great, and it's quite insightful to know that India is producing over 60% of its energy from green sources. Could you just speak about how that creation is being plugged into a data center activities? Do we have a kind of a pipeline set up where we are able to channel that into that, or is that something that we should build?
So, see, this eventually depends on the data center firm themselves, right? And it's for them to eventually tie up with the power generation firm. And thankfully, our policies allow for these dedicated power purchase agreements to be signed. And so it's possible now for the data center firms, and they have done it. I mean, if you look at our report, we have cited a few examples, both by Indian and international firms in India, whether it's STT, Nextra, NTT, Capital Land, Control S. They have already got into partnerships to secure green power for their data centers in India. So we are pretty much ahead of the race. And I think I have the numbers in front of me exactly. Out of the 820 gigawatts of power, which is expected to be to come up in the future, as in which means that this is the investment going into power generation in the future. 61% of that would be green, renewable. Currently, we have about 400 and I think it was by 2030 the figure was about 415 gigawatt is expected of fresh power generation, and out of that 40% is green power, which means our investment in green power is only increasing as the time goes, and India will stand tall across the world, stating that a very significant investment in our fresh power generation is green.
That's very interesting. Good to know. Thank you so much, Vivek, for your time and giving all the wonderful details about how data centers are being built and giving your perspective on how the dynamics is changing globally and a more microscope view in Asia Pacific and in India. It's been a great discussion. Thank you so much for your time.
Thank you, John. Thank you for the opportunity. It's good to speak to you. Thank you.
Thank you for tuning into the Interface podcast powered by AMD EPYC processors. Please do check out amd.com for more details about the product. For more such episodes on technology and innovation, tune into the Interface on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, or wherever you get your podcasts from. Do share your comments with us about the podcast at theinterface@thehindu.co.in. To keep yourself updated with the latest tech, please go to thehindu.com or follow us on all social media platforms. Thank you.